is on mute for the time being, just because he is working on getting all of the feed set up to be able to take questions so we can answer your questions in real time. This is Ask a Treasury Recruiter. It's part of our weekly installments. It's our opportunity to interact with the Treasury community. And even if you're not Treasury based, we're happy to answer any questions around resumes, around job searching, interviewing, just career advice, anything like that. This is the opportunity or the time that we carve out each week to be able to interact with you and answer your questions. So with that, just a quick call out, quick reminder. Feel free to ask. This is our time or your time to ask two experienced recruiters our views on the industry, our views on just what we've experienced throughout the course of our career. And again, we have predetermined questions. We've had some people text in ahead of time. Again, thank you for doing that. But also, if you're joining us and watching us live right now, please make sure that you're asking those questions. Scotty, are we up and running?
Yes, we are. I don't see any questions yet through the feed here on LinkedIn, but welcome everyone. Looks like a handful of you have joined, and we keep getting more adding every minute here, which is great. And Joe, you had a couple, right? Pre-text questions?
Yeah, so we've had a couple of questions that have been texted over the course of the week. So Scotty, let's just jump right into it. I'll start off by asking you, should I be applying to roles in the fourth quarter? I know things slow down between Thanksgiving and the end of the year. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so I think the short answer is absolutely. And I think it goes back to, we talk about this every week, and it's hard to give general advice, right? Because it's always dependent on the individual. But at the end of the day, if you're looking for a new job, then this is a fantastic opportunity because it slows down. And, I think we've talked a little bit about a strategy outside of simply applying. So we want you to kind of implement some of that feedback. But at the end of the day, again, I think in short, it's absolutely just for the very reason the answer is contained right there within the question. Because things slow down, because other people are all thinking the same thing. Hey, it's slow. No one's going to be looking. Well, reality is somebody probably is, and it's slow, so they're not going to see as much as they normally do. That's kind of my initial thought. Joe, what do you have to add?
Yeah, I don't think there's a bad time to be looking for a job if you are actively applying in the market. I mean, it's, I think the natural tendency for all of us toward the end of the year is to kind of take your foot off the gas and maybe just to ease into the holidays, start to prep for the next year. I think you're kind of doing yourself a disservice if you find yourself in that scenario. Companies are still interviewing. There are new jobs that are coming out daily. And really, to exactly your point, this is usually the time that recruiters are able to catch up a little bit if they're not taking time off, is because everybody else is usually taking time off. Now, it may be a scenario, and this is case by case, but there are competing priorities at the end of the year, right? For Treasury specific, you're going to have your year-end closes, and regardless of industry, you're probably going to have time or people taking time off, people being out of the office. It may be a little bit more clunky, but this is as good a time as any to be trying to catch someone's attention if you are actively looking for open roles. I'm 100% on board with you there. Is there anything else that we haven't covered, or any other thoughts on that?
As we joked right before we jumped on here live, we could probably take up the whole half an hour, with this one question and plenty of, you and I don't lack in opinions, right?
Yep.
But I think that's the high level. Hopefully that's a satisfying answer to whomever it was that asked the question. But we're starting to get a few questions here from the community on our feed. So let me, maybe if you're okay with it, Joe, just jump into those. So first question, Zolt, thank you for the question. Should I expect to see a difference in salary for remote work? Joe, what do you think?
I think it's going to be based company to company. This is more in the IT space, but I'm very well aware of the fact that some of the larger tech companies, as they allowed for remote work, they have different salary ranges depending on where you're at in the country. Treasury, the overall compensation tends to be fairly static, so I wouldn't see too much variation, to be perfectly honest with you. But when you think about how compensation is determined overall, you're going to have your higher area or your higher cost of living areas. You're going to have your lower cost of living areas, usually to account for those costs. You'll have what's called a COLA. It's cost of living allocation, basically. And so like New York, you're probably going to have, every company or most large companies will have their base range for each level of the company. And then based on market, there will be a percentage increase, then that's your COLA. So with remote becoming a little bit more prevalent, you may see some of the COLA that's reduced, meaning that it could be a company that's based in New York who's looking maybe to hire in Detroit that's a little bit cheaper. But Treasury being Treasury, I think if I had to take an educated guess on this, it's probably going to be that your compensation should remain fairly static, at least from a salary perspective. I know we experienced something very, very similar, even as we were going through the first winter last year. Like, had a whole bunch of people from Michigan who wanted to all of a sudden move out to California, thinking that they're going to make $100,000 or $200,000 as an analyst, and it's just not realistic, right? So, with Treasury being a specialized skill set, I do think that there may be some minor variations based on the market, but overall it does stay fairly static. How about you, Scotty?
Yeah, I have the exact same answer, but for a little bit different reason, Joe. I think you're 100% right that you really shouldn't expect a different salary for remote work in Treasury today. But my rationale behind that is because it's so new and it's still just Treasury teams and Treasury leaders are still trying to figure it out. So I wouldn't be surprised if in the future we do start to see, like you mentioned, the tech firms, then the IT positions, that this is, many IT positions have been remote for years. And so they already have the benefit of studies around COLA or anything else, and also just the norm in that particular industry. So you see it more. I think that'll happen eventually, but I've said this to many people about remote work, and it seems to be borne out in just conversation after conversation. It will start as a competitive advantage, post-COVID for companies, and then eventually it'll just become the norm, and you'll have to figure out another way to compete for top talent. But this is not just, if you pay attention to some of the top leadership across industries. This is certainly not just a Treasury question. This is a question many companies are looking at really seriously. And I can't remember which fund it was or which investment company had mentioned that they're a talent company. They're gonna basically let the talent dictate what happens from a remote working standpoint or really any other trend. So again, I would say in the near term, you don't have to worry about a salary difference, but give it 2 or 3 years and you likely will start to see those adjustments catching up.
Well, and here's the reality with it too. For if you're at the top of your game, no matter what profession you're in, someone's going to pay you. And you may run into something where you will have those companies out there that are making lowball offers. I saw it in the IT space during the GFC, and then all of a sudden, those companies, as soon as the economy comes back, they're backfilling those positions because those people have moved on to greener pastures. So. Yep. Nobody works for free. Compensation isn't always at the top of everyone's decision-making criteria, but it's definitely within that top 3, I'd have to say. So you may see some depression in the short term in terms of comp, or as you mentioned, in 2 to 3 years, you may see it generally tend to trend downward, but you're still going to have those companies that will pay top dollar for good talent.
Indeed. Yeah. There's what we think should happen, right, Joe? And then there's what will happen. So.
Yep. And we know that there is a little bit of a lag there for sure. And it really comes down to the HR and the compensation policies of the company, to be perfectly honest with you.
Indeed. All right. Very good. So next question from Lisa. Lisa, appreciate the question. She says, good morning from Colorado. Good morning from Utah. What is considered advanced Excel skills? And just real quick, before I pitch this over to you, Joe, I would say, to qualify this, I think you're probably asking the question because so many job descriptions have advanced, quote unquote, advanced Excel skills in their description. I'm going to pitch it to Joe for his opinion on this, and then I'll kind of give you my thinking around that. But yeah, Joe, what do you think is considered advanced Excel skills.
I mean, bluntly, can I just say that I think that requirement is garbage?
I knew it. And yeah, that's, yes, you may.
So here's the thing. If there are no context clues throughout the course of the job responsibilities about working with pivot tables, generating reports, anything like that, it's highly subjective on what exactly defines advanced Excel skills. I would err in this situation, Lisa, if I'm you, and good afternoon from Michigan. Good morning to you. But if I'm you in this situation, if you know the basics, with being in finance, I think it's pretty much a given that you know your way around Microsoft Office, especially Excel. Throw your hat in the ring for it. I mean, if anything, this is just a filler in a job description and kind of stating the obvious that, yeah, we need someone who isn't going to come in and have to YouTube everything that needs to be done on Excel. Some companies may do pre-employment tests where they actually test your Excel skills. And that'll be, I guess, kind of how you stack up. That's the kind of cold hard truth of whether or not you know Excel and how that needs to be done. But I mean, even that's an imperfect process too, because they may test you on stuff that may not necessarily be relevant to the job. So, it's I'm trying to be as polite about this as I can, but overall, I feel very strongly that I hate companies that do this.
You've nailed it, man. That's exactly what I was going to say. Is this is just a lazy and canned bullet that nearly everybody puts into a job description. Yeah. And it goes to, we've alluded to a series we're creating for hiring managers and hiring professionals in Treasury about how best to go through the process of identifying an internal business need and then posting a job for it eventually. And one of the things we'll talk about in that series is just the importance of differentiating. If you are going to post a job somewhere, there's a way to do it that can really differentiate you as a company. Lisa, what you've encountered with this advanced Excel skills bullet is what most companies do, which is dust off an HR generated job description and basically say, yeah, advanced Excel skills is necessary in this role. To Joe's point, I think that if they are asking for modeling experience, forecasting, especially in treasury operations, is always going to be a part of the job description. But many times those models for forecasting are already built. So it's important. It goes back to understanding, if the job's the right fit for you. It's important to understand and ask those questions, I think, because to Joe's point, I would say that's probably not necessarily a well thought out bullet, but you do want to understand what it means. And I think that's, to flip it back to you, Lisa, the thing to do would be when you get into the interview process, make sure you ask the question and understand what they mean, because it really can be just a number of different things.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, as you were talking, I thought about this, as you're going to make those little tweaks to your resume before applying, maybe include a couple of bullet point under each position around what you've done with Excel, not like just basic data entry or anything like that, but if you've done the forecasting piece, if you've run reports, if you've done that type of stuff using Excel, just include a quick little snippet around what you've done. It might catch somebody's eye and at least get you to have the conversation. That way you're able to better explain your experience to get a better understanding as to what they're looking for from an Excel standpoint.
Absolutely. I love that. That's great advice. All right. So Ricardo has a question, and I'm not entirely sure, Ricardo, if you're still on. Okay. So he did already, he got out ahead of me here. So yeah, this is helpful context. Okay. So the first part of Ricardo's question, how different do you think it is to recruit for a corporate treasury? Second part of the question, compared to recruiting for a treasury in a bank. What do you think, Joe?
There are similarities and there are differences here, right? I mean, it's we don't do a whole lot in the banking space, but if you get into the core treasury operations, I guess, from a banking treasury, the cash management, the liquidity forecasting, cash forecasting, reconciliations, all that type of stuff at the lower levels is going to be very similar, if not the same, as in a corporate setting, except maybe you're working around with other people's money and there's a heavier emphasis on liquidity and stress testing. So you're going to have like the little differences between the industry overall. But on the corporate side, I mean, it's a little bit more defined as There aren't, at the lower levels, there aren't a whole lot of differences, just from an operations perspective. When you get up to the upper levels, that's where it becomes more strategic, and that's where you really start to see your differences. Like I see analysts and managers bounce between banking and corporate quite a bit. It's usually the senior level individuals who struggle with it a little bit more. Oh, and I think we've lost Scotty, at least temporarily here. So with that, oh, here he is. So I lost you there for a minute.
It was me that got lost.
Yeah, it's all good. I was just saying, I was finishing my thought that really between banking and corporate, if you're in the traditional treasury and you're not in the products and services side, there is not a whole lot of difference at the lower levels with reconciliations and cash and liquidity and everything that's going on there. It's once you start to get into the more senior levels and the more strategic conversation, that's where there are strategic differences there, because you're more worried about risk and liquidity and just stress testing at the higher up you get in a bank, opposed to depending on most traditional corporates will say that.
Yeah, I think that's from what I gathered there, because I obviously got dropped. Apologies for that, but I mean, I think you pretty much nailed it as far as the differences that I see as well. I'm curious though. Ricardo asks, do you think it is how different do you think it is to recruit for one versus the other? And so, insofar as that's the question, I do think that there are probably some soft skill differences that hiring managers on either side might look for. And at the end of the day, it really is important in Treasury, regardless, to have the ability to present, the ability to, build relationships with different stakeholders across organizations. But there might be a little bit more of an ability to persuade and influence on the banking side if you are customer facing. But again, I think it's a broad question, and we could cover it for the next 15 minutes, and that's probably a good high level at this point.
Well, and that's you bring up a good point there with the soft skills, though, because banking does tend to be a little bit more reserved, a little bit more of a buttoned up environment, because it's all about compliance and everything that goes into that. So they're probably going to look for someone who maybe, in most cases, is going to be a little bit more conservative. And at that time, I mean, you're not going to be able to go in there if you're someone who enjoys changing and building and everything that goes into that, and you think you're going to come in and change the world in the banking space. It may not necessarily happen overnight because of all of the stuff. Usually there isn't as good of a story to tell on the banking side because it is fairly consistent. And I don't mean to demean banking by any stretch of the imagination there, but you're just more limited in what you can do. And that's just what I know from speaking with banking professionals who want to make that transition into corporate for the exact same reason that we just talked about.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I don't see any new questions at this point from the community. Okay. It looks like we've had several people join us though. And so it's probably worth saying again to everyone who's watching right now, if you have a question, this is an Ask Me Anything format. Joe and I are happy to tell you what we recruiters think, or at least the two of us. And I know we have some additional, or I think we have some additional questions that got texted in ahead of time, right? So we can go to one of those.
Yeah. So here's the question I'll pose to you, Scotty. This person had said, I applied to a role previously. I saw the position was reposted. I tried to apply again, but got a notification that I had already applied. What does this mean, and what should I do about it?
Yeah, so I actually may have already addressed this question privately, but I appreciate being able to address it for the group. So, I mean, it could be quite frankly, as simple as the applicant tracking system or ATS having a built-in functionality to, essentially kick you out if you've already applied for a specific job. So on the back end of an ATS, generally there's a requisition that's been created, and that requisition isn't necessarily closed when a job. So what I would say would most likely happen, they declined you the first time. They probably had somebody else in mind. They may have even gone so far as to make an offer to that person and expected that person would accept. So let's take the job down externally, but the job stays open internally. And then that person doesn't accept the job or whatever happens, right? Now, okay, the job's still open. We'll repost, but the ATS, it doesn't necessarily recognize that it's been reposted. So you go to apply again, you've already applied once. The ATS most likely has functionality that immediately just says, sorry, you've already applied. The team's already seen your application. There's no need for you to apply again. We can address how I would recommend you, go from there. But I think that's likely what's happened. Anything I might be missing there, Joe?
No, you're right on the money there. I mean, it ultimately comes down to how the recruiting or HR team functions. But to your point, usually they'll close if it gets to the point of an offer, an offer is accepted, the person starts or whatever like that. That requisition will close down. In order to do that, most ATSs or applicant tracking systems will force you to open a new requisition. At that time, they wouldn't be able to decline. They wouldn't be able to automatically move anyone over. You'd be able to apply. Just based on the context that I know about this, it's either number one, the position went on hold for a couple of months and was pulled down, and maybe it was just put on hold in the ATS internally, and then all of a sudden it popped back up on the career site, so it was scraped by the job board again. Or it could be a situation where they did temporarily take it down because they had someone in the onboarding process and that fell through. And all of a sudden, we're dealing with people at the end of the day. Things can happen, right? So the job's back out there. It looks new to you, and you go to apply, and then you're just not able to because you've already applied, you've already been reviewed, you've already been declined for one way or another. So let's tackle the next piece. If you run into that situation, what should you do?
Right. Yeah. So again, I think knowing what we know, which is that you weren't even able to apply again, right? You were told, like, as you started the application, hey, you can't apply again, which means that when you want to express your interest the second time around, you're actually unable to notify that recruiter or hiring manager that you're interested at this point, right? So I think the logical next step or the rational next step would be, and this isn't overstepping any kind of boundaries. Sometimes we recommend you push boundaries a little bit with regard to reaching out to people. In this case, I think it's perfectly acceptable and reasonable to just follow up with whoever the recruiter is. And if you don't know who the recruiter is, there's two ways to find out. One is just look at the last email you got that rejected your applicancy and see if there was a recruiter associated with it. But if not, you can take your best guess, right? Just go into LinkedIn, go into that particular company, filter for recruiter, and then you're probably going to have a decent idea, or at least a limited pool of people that you can reach out to express your interest. You want to take it a step farther, I would say you want to go directly to the hiring manager, and likely the way I would recommend you do it is to make mention of the fact that you had applied in the past and you did receive a rejection, but it looks like the position is back open and you're interested in reapplying to it. I think it's as straightforward as that. Any other context or anything you do differently there, Joe?
No, I think you're right on the money there. It's just a situation where if you're unable to apply, do what you can. And again, it's going to take a little bit of additional effort. I would go into this with very, very low expectations on someone getting back to you, because the reality is a recruiter would probably just tell you to go apply again anyway. And if you say that you can't apply, then they're going to be like, well, I already passed on you. I don't know why you're reaching out to me. Recruiters are just goofy that way. So go into it with low expectations. You're going to have to do a little bit of additional explaining, and all you're trying to do is get on the phone to understand what's going on, and really get an understanding as to where you missed the mark, because it could be something as simple as your resume wasn't tailored the right way, or they didn't see something that they were looking for. So all you're trying to do is get in front of whomever that was to really explain what happened and try to learn a little bit more about the role. So yeah, I think you're right on the mark for what you did.
Nice.
We have anything else from the group?
Does not look like anything else from the group at this point. Nope. Any other messages, text in?
Yeah, I did have one person reach out to me over the weekend just asking, transitioning into the US now that we're, I think they're voting on the Electoral College today or whatever it may be, but now we're going to have a transition of power. Just overall, visas have been a hot topic, and everything that comes into the previous regime and their stance on visas and everything that goes into that. Had some questions about, hey, do we or how do we see this impacting people's ability to be able to relocate into the U.S. after this is happening? I'm trying. It was a long text conversation, so I'm trying to figure out how to pose the question. But ultimately, do we see anything, or do we have clients that are open to remote work or relocating people from outside of the U.S.? And if so, if you're outside of the U.S., how do you go about relocating, or what does that look like for now? So I'll kick it over to you, and then I'll clean it up.
Yeah, exactly. Because there's some landmines in here I might be stepping on. Well, I think, again, just because this is a bit of a loaded topic and there's politics involved, and it's nuanced, right? There's not really any way of knowing. I would just say that generally speaking, prior to the last administration, there was, the regulations around H-1Bs in particular, but just visas in general, were not as tight as they got over the last 4 years. So given the similarities in the incoming administration and the one prior to our current, I would say it probably stands to reason that you will have a softening of regulation around visas. And so that's obviously a good thing. At the same time, politicians are always cognizant of their constituents. And right now, with the unemployment rate the way it is, I mean, this is an opportunity for a politician to talk about wanting to take care of American citizens first. And there's so many American citizens that are currently unemployed. It, could also stand to reason that you're gonna have no changes made because, hey, the current administration is the bad guy. I just do nothing, and that kind of satisfies the my constituency that's U.S. Citizens already.
Yeah.
So that's a convoluted answer, but it's a very complex question. And I think that at the end of the day, it could go one of two ways. Now, last thing I'll mention, just on the back of your question there, Joe, you asked, what's the best way to go about this? I think the absolute best way to go about this is to, wherever you are in the world, to try to find a multinational organization that has a U.S. headquarters and get employment with them in your current country. Because frankly, the single best, we see it all the time, the single best way to get to the U.S. on a visa is you're already employed with a multinational and they have an opportunity for you to come to the U.S. I'd say that's the number one thing. Depending on your risk tolerance, I know we're talking to Treasury professionals, so risk tolerance isn't always highest among this group here, but the maybe the single best way is to just take a huge chance, come to the U.S. already unemployed, and then focus on trying to find employment here. That's a real challenge, and I'm not in any way advocating for that because, again, you still have to work on the whole visa process. But that is another way you could do it because, frankly, if you're a really strong candidate and you're already here and you're interviewing for a company and they love you, it's a lot more likely that they're going to, have that conversation and potentially sponsor your visa than it is for you to apply from wherever you are in the world today. So those would be the two ways. The safer way is the first way. The way riskier way is the second way. That's about all I can think of in terms of how to best go about it.
Yeah, I'm dead on with you. It's just one of those situations where try to find the work with the U.S. multinational firm and see if they're willing to relocate to the U.S. that way. When you look at the work visa process overall, it doesn't really matter the administration. I mean, I've seen it throughout the course of my career. We've both been in IT where that the H-1B, the primary work visa, is a lottery to begin with, and there are many applicants, and the chance of hitting that lottery just right off the bat are difficult. Not everyone gets them. And when you look at it, even from the hiring side, you have to go through your due diligence to show that this skill set doesn't necessarily even exist in your candidate pool as it is. There's a lot of administrative work that goes behind it. And there's a lot of, there are financial administrative costs that come along with this too, because you have lawyers involved, you have the actual visa process, you have everything that goes into that. And it does make companies fairly adverse to doing that type of stuff. I haven't run into too many companies in the Treasury space that are open to providing work sponsorship. It doesn't mean that it doesn't happen. I just haven't spoken to anyone who's who's been comfortable with it for exactly the reasons that we just talked about, because it is a fairly labor intensive process once you even identify the person that you want to hire or offer that visa to.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And the point you made about, making a case for the scarcity of the skill set is really important, one that I obviously didn't mention. And I think there is a case to be made in Treasury based on what we're seeing in terms of jobs, taking a long time to go filled, but it's still exactly like you say, you're going to have to make that case. And that takes a lot, including, hiring attorneys and everything else. So yeah, I think, like we said, the safest and probably best path is that first path. Getting hired with a multinational that has a headquarters here, and then trying to make that transfer later on.
Definitely. Cool. Any other questions from the community?
No more questions. So last call, I guess, for questions here in the comment section, because we're pretty well wrapped up for today, right, Joe?
We are. So with that, thanks as always, everyone, for tuning in. If you do have any questions, even that you think of that were generated today, feel free to text me, to email me or Scotty, to do whatever you need to do to get those questions answered. We're happy to answer questions offline too. But we definitely come from the point of, if you have that question, there's a very good chance that someone else does too. So that's why we take these frequently asked questions and we incorporate them into every conversation as well. We will be back next Monday for the last one of the year before we go on a little bit of a holiday break. So with that, good luck in the searches. If you guys need anything in the meantime, feel free to reach out. Otherwise, we'll talk to you on Monday afternoon. Have a good one.